Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. One of my favorite bits about this entire show is, the fact that Callum Turner just he likes to sing and he's just going to sing no matter what when he's drunk. I think it's so much fun, but it also does put, a weight on a music supervisor because you have to be like, what song would this man A want to sing and be able to sing at a moment's notice? When you get those little things in a script, is that exciting for you to kind of know that you get to dive into that and figure out where it would fit? Or is it daunting when it is a time period like this that is kind of so specific?
That's a great question. Thank you. And it's really funny because it's different for every project, but for Masters, especially because this was a trilogy, and I also music supervise Band of Brothers and the Pacific. One of the most important things that to stay true to Don Miller's book and also to us at Playtone is to be very, very specific in the research and time period. And also anything for an on-camera just to make sure that the actor is able to do it. So there's a lot of rehearsal involved, even if it's just a ditty of an a cappella in a bar, that type of thing. So generally, what we always try to do is to go back to the true characters that Don Miller did portray to see if there was anything in particular that they did like, and to cross-reference any kind of period music that would apply to that. For example, there was one character, Rosie Rosenthal, who was a very, very big jazz fan in real life. So we really did echo that in his character.
Yeah, and I think, with a show like this, those moments are also so important too, because you're watching characters you know and love die, or you get to see them kind of stuck in a prisoner of war camp. And
Mhm.
when you are music supervising that does, I always think like the Vietnam War would be the most fun to kind of music supervise because I think that has the most interesting music to kind of
Right.
look back on. But with World War II, we have maybe in, the baby boom era and everything after had these kind of war anthems, but it wasn't necessarily like a real big thing back then.
Mhm.
Do you find it to be exciting though to kind of find songs that will fit that tone since it's not as specifically like written for World War II?
Yeah, absolutely. Like for example, with Rosie's character, which I could speak to specifically because he really was a jazz fan in
Mhm.
real life, and Don Miller definitely touches on that in his book. There's a moment, it's on it's in episode number 5 where he's on the plane and everything is very tense. They're the only ones out there. And he all of a sudden impromptu starts to hum an Artie Shaw song, the chant, which kind of calms the whole crew. And it's a really, really important moment in storytelling and also just an emotional arc for the to settle the crew and to get them back safely. So I do find it, and it's true when you say like, the Vietnam War and the known 60s stuff. And our generations and early generations certainly know all those songs early on, but it's really fun to find like hidden gems or even some of the hits of that time that can come alive in a different way when the character starts to bring it to life vocally.
Do you ever kind of make like I know actors do this, but like do you ever kind of make a playlist that are songs that you're not necessarily going to use, but help you kind of get into the mind and understand like the genre of music you're looking for specific scenes?
Absolutely. I mean, my colleague, my co-supervisor, Rachel Latzenheiser, and I mean, the best thing to do, I find, is to work with a team, like internally here. So we always are early on from script stage, putting together a playlist that is inspiring us and also that we send to the filmmakers, inspiring them, and have that conversation going. And it is really fun, like to incorporate a lot of the hits, but there's so many hidden gems of that era that have not been touched, ever licensed. There was some stuff for us that we found like fell in love with, and then it's a very, very difficult problem clearance. And then you realize why it was never licensed or brought to
Mhm.
life. But to really go that extra effort in um, clearing the song, making it happen, and then to know that, for example, in our show, it's for the first time given life again, you know, that maybe was in an old dusty vinyl in someone's closet that never saw the light of day and wasn't a hit.
Mhm.
And then one of the other really fun things that we found was um, we had heard from a lot of the publishers that the estates of a lot of the copyrights, like how happy they were of the songs we used. It gives us the best joy because the family members of these songwriters really, really were fans of the series.
Was that kind of intentional though? Because, with a lot of these stories, like even Band of Brothers and the Pacific, we as the audience are learning about specific men that we maybe wouldn't have known prior
Mhm.
to the books or the shows. What is it your intention then through this music to do the same for the artists that people maybe aren't listening to when they want to feel that like 1940s era?
Absolutely. I mean, it goes hand in hand because we all know how much music touches us
Mhm.
in terms of how it touches us emotionally in our life when we're just in the car or out in the world, or a song that echoes to something that our mom had or our dad had. So to pull the generational thread for everyone is absolutely something that we try to touch. But I always find, in Rachel, we always talk about this too, that it's got to happen on an organic way. You know,
Mhm.
it's got to come from, like, that's one of the most fun. And when you say, do you ever pull a playlist together? In the beginning, when we're just sharing songs, talking about the script, doing script breakdowns, we never try to do it to intentionally create an emotion. It's
Mhm.
got to organically come. And then something we could be shooting, right? And there's an impression that we want to give during the first blush of on set, and then it changes in post-production when the editing is done, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, and you know, I said before, I was like, my favorite genre of music, which I feel like is weird to say. Well, I love classic rock, but I also love like, that Vietnam War era, just because I think like you had Buffalo Springfield and all these bands that kind of existed then and then didn't afterwards. But it was such a commentary on the time. With a show like this, most of the songs from the 1940s that we connect with are like love songs or songs about like hope and things that I wouldn't necessarily connect back with anyone during the World War II era. So is it kind of more difficult to then find a song, or is it looking through the characters and like being that beacon of hope through music that you kind of like navigate what songs to pick?
It's both. And you know, I know that you are very familiar with our field, and
Mhm.
you know, you're a huge music fan too and watch a lot of content. So in our jobs as music supervisor, we have our thoughts and opinions, but we're really just shepherds
Mhm.
here to let and be the messengers in certain ways, like creative musical messengers for the filmmakers to decide. Because we can have our hearts set on something that we think is so terrific. And if the filmmakers and the writers and sometimes the actors feel differently about it, then it's always up to them, you know?
Mhm.
So, but our job is to really kind of excavate the best stuff out there and to dig deep and go beyond just the first level of what's available. And you know, that's just like the creative aspect is just one of the mission finding on it.
And how do you guys kind of navigate the audience desire in some cases for a very popular song that they might just be like, oh, I'll sing along, I know that, versus like you were saying, these gems that people maybe have never heard or were like buried somewhere and now are getting that second life?
What do you mean? Like
Like,
how,
how do you kind of like, do you ever have to come to a decision of like, people are going to want to sing along? I'm going to have to go for the more popular choice when people would like, you don't want to, you kind of want to go back to that gem that you found?
all the time. Because it's so funny because in different fields I talk to people that are in different crafts and fields of either an interior designer who I give the analogy, who always says, no, that tile in the shower is what everyone does, and then the common person comes in and is like, I want that tile, and the designer's like, but there's this other cool way to do it. But you do have to remember, like, not you, like
Yeah.
us as music supervisors, we're there literally just to um know, like, to help also the audience emotionally connect with it. And so there are a lot of times when a director will take a lot of chances, or producers will, in creating something that isn't necessarily a sing along or a hum along, but if it is really called for something that is more familiar, then we always know that that's always the best decision.
And do you ever have, because I've had this moment recently because I'm a big Fleetwood Mac fan, but my favorite Fleetwood Mac song was always Silver Springs. So I felt
Right,
really like special because I was like, people don't necessarily pick this. And then
right,
all of a sudden it got very popular. And I was like,
right.
oh, but I used to be special. Now I'm
Right.
just like in line with the rest of the world. Do you ever have that moment when you hear the song you picked, see kind of the like cultural reaction to it and how it goes off, or are you got like, no, I'm glad that people now have a appreciation for this song that they maybe didn't know beforehand?
I'm always thrilled. I'm always thrilled when doors can be open, because just as you know, like how Silver Springs, I love that song, by the way, how, like, it harkens something probably special for you in your past. And if other people can enjoy that, it's like there is always, I always say it's like the method of abundance with the amount of music out there. And even if it is, I mean, we're talking more contemporary music, but even if it is, when we say, oh, like, there is never an original idea, it's always taken from something else. But that's how great art is done too. So, however, we can keep creating and putting it into the atmosphere for people to enjoy and give that feeling, I mean, that's how I always felt as a music fan when I was like 9, 10, 11. And so if other people can experience that too, it's always joyful.
Has there ever been, not necessarily Masters of Air, but just like any project you've worked on, a song that you found that you hadn't known before, but when you were researching and trying to find, you found a song that you just were like, oh no, I love this, and it became one of your favorites just through the process?
There's actually an old Fleetwood Mac song, Albatross,
Yeah.
the instrumental one, that was used for, we used it actually as temp music score for a Denis Villeneuve film. I think it was Prisoners, the Hugh
Mm.
Jackman film.
Yeah, J. Dillon.
And we ended up having Johan Johansson score it. And, I love working with composers that people hadn't known before. And that
Mhm.
was what Johan's big first film before he did Theory of Everything. And but Albatross was one of those songs that I felt like, wow, that's a joy. And then there are always those, funny ones. I remember working on a comedy called She's Out of My League,
Mhm.
and super fun film. And uh I got an early release of the early Lady Gaga, and before anyone had heard it. And I remember saying to our director, this is so great, let's license it. And he overlooked it. And it's one of those heartbreaking things. But, you know, um, everything always finds its place
Mhm.
wherever it's supposed to be. And that's what's so great about film and TV and music, that things that never saw the light of day are able to later, years and years later. And probably for you, I mean, what's your experience with Fleetwood Mac? Was it a like family thing that you
I ended up being the Fleetwood Mac fan in my family. My dad was a big classic rock fan. Like we used to listen to the Beatles. He loves the Who. Like
Hmm.
sounds all that was in the car. But Fleetwood Mac, like I think maybe they liked like the Chain and something like that. But like I became the Fleetwood Mac fan because I'm
Hmm.
obsessed with like Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks' whole deal.
Right.
And so I loved just the drama behind the band and like the band itself. So it was like, and my older brother's he introduced Springsteen to all of us. So it was kind of like one of us always had the artist that was like ours. And so like
That's
Fleetwood
great.
Mac is kind of like I love them, but they were just like, yeah, I know that song. And I'm like, yeah, but this performance of Silver Springs is crazy.
That's great. Well, it's also, it creates such a wonderful conversation
Mhm.
and, brings people together too. And
Yeah.
lucky for you, you get to see Fleetwood Mac all the time in film and TV.
Yeah, they're everywhere. But
Yeah.
was there for Masters of Air specifically, was there like an artist that you hadn't maybe even hadn't heard of, or like a song that you hadn't heard of from an artist that you discovered with through this process?
There were a few, there was, I mean, we used a lot of Duke Ellington and classic things, but there is a Lena Horne track, Prisoner of Love, that I really loved in episode 7. And a Vera Lynn song, Who's Taking You Home Tonight, which I really adored as well. And, it's funny because on early films that Rachel and I work on, sometimes there's something that we find that comes to life in a later film, like I really adore to, find, like for example, Folkways, which is a historic label that has a lot of Alan Lomax stuff, like
Mhm.
a pianist that hadn't been discovered, and then bringing that forward in another film, even though we're looking for it here. So sometimes it works that way too in our music library.
And for our last question, I'm taking your past work out of this, but is there like a era or a genre of film that you haven't really gotten to dive into that you want to musically and like see what songs or what music would fit that film?
Well, there's a genre that I have worked in that I'd love to work in again to
Mhm.
see. And it's been a couple years, so I would love to do that more right now with what's available is just science fiction films,
Mm.
like I mentioned, Book of Eli. I also worked on Blade Runner 2049. And you know, there's stuff like that um primarily, I've been doing a lot of period projects that I adore, and I love certain period projects that can do things like Masters of the Air or The Piano Lesson, which I just finished for Netflix,
Mhm.
that is hopefully due out soon. And then, but science fiction with the amount of new music out, I think it's super fun.
Well, I have one now. I lied. That wasn't my last question because now you made me want to ask another one. So, are you responsible for putting my favorite Frank Sinatra song in Blade Runner 2049?
Well, we were involved in it and the Elvis songs, but the primarily when it's big, with big estates like that too, it's a whole team of us that make it happen.
I've
So,
very rarely have I heard Frank singing One for My Baby like in something because that's my
uh-huh.
favorite Sinatra song. And so that scene always just I'm like, I forget every time, and it makes me so happy that he's singing One for My Baby. Because I
Mhm.
just rewatched it on the plane when I was coming
Oh,
back from the
really?
trip, and I was like, that's right. I got my Frank movie. It makes me so
That's
happy.
great. Yeah, there was a lot with different estates
Yeah.
for Blade Runner that we dealt with as well.
Oh my God, I love it. But thank you so much for talking with me. I'm always just so fascinated when it comes to like the music side of things, but I really appreciate it. And
Thank you, Rachel. It's a
yeah,
pleasure to meet you. And
yeah.
I also really appreciate how attuned you are. You're really like very um astute at the details too. And I really appreciate that. And it's a joy talking to you.
Thank you. Well, have a great day.
You too.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Bye.
Bye.